Will the PlayStation 5 have PlayStation 3 backwards compatibility? Now, this is probably going to be the hardest question to answer out of all of them. The PS4, I think, is a shoo-in. We're going to talk about the PS2 and PS1 eventually, but for the PS3, it's definitely the toughest question because the PS3 has very, very, very complicated hardware compared to the 360. So, it's so easy to say, well, the Xbox One had 360 backwards compatibility. And we all know, I mean, at this point, it's pretty much a given that the next Xbox console will have Xbox One backwards compatibility and also 360 backwards compatibility because the 360 backwards compatibility is all software. Right, it's not a hardware thing, so if they add the backwards compatibility, it's not like it's going to add any extra cost to the actual console. It's all software, so they don't have to worry about that like Sony did with the PS3 with its backwards compatibility, which ultimately led to the console costing $600. So it's pretty much a given that they're going to have the backwards compatibility for the next Xbox for Xbox One and Xbox 360. Now with the PS5, I think it's a given that we'll have PS4 backwards compatibility. If not a software emulator, they'll definitely just make a system that's similar in architecture. Like I'm pretty sure they're gonna find some way to make it backwards compatible for PlayStation 4 games at least, because it would be not only would it be such a great thing. Like I mean I kind of went into this last time, but just to briefly reiterate it. It would just be a great thing for PlayStation gamers, and it would just be great marketing for them to be able to play the games that you've been playing for all this time. And a lot of people are late adopters into the PlayStation 4, so the late adopters would feel more inclined to buy it then because they have so many games already, or they just bought some games, so the games don't feel old already. You know what I mean? They can play those games. But if you want full in-depth reasons as to why I think that the backwards compatibility for PS4 games at least will be there for PlayStation 5, you should check out that video. I'm not going to go too in-depth on that, but it's happening. I think it's happening just as likely as it is going to happen for the Xbox, whatever it's going to be called. I hate how they went from Xbox to 360 to One. It was such a dumb name. But I'm honestly not sure about the PlayStation 3, to be honest with you. If we're going to get PS3 backwards compatibility, at the very least, I don't think it will be a launch thing. I mean, it would be cool if they just said at launch, PlayStation 4, 3, 2, 1 games, every PlayStation generation is playable. I mean, that would just blow people away. But PlayStation 3 backwards compatibility is kind of it's questionable because making an emulator for that would probably be a bitch and a half and would probably cost them a lot of resources. Like I'm sure the Xbox 360 emulator wasn't easy for Microsoft to make, and Microsoft is a tech giant, is a software giant. Software is their specialty. So they were able to make it, and they did say it was challenging. Their engineers had a fucking hard time figuring it out, but they did. So I wonder how Sony would fare in making a PS3 emulator. I would very honestly be surprised if they did, but it's possible. You can't outrule it completely, but I would say it's more unlikely than likely, just because it's just the PlayStation 3 is one of the most complicated consoles. And that's why a lot of the ports were inferior on the PS3, despite the PS3 technically having a little bit more of a technological edge over the 360. Nothing significant, of course, but, for the games to run worse on the PS3 is kind of, Yeah, the architecture was just so complex for that system. And, Skyrim on the PS3 is the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about that. So emulating that onto a new console, Sony might not feel that is necessary or it's profitable enough. I mean, sure, it would be cool, like I said, if they were like PS4 3, 2, 1 games are going to be all backwards compatible to just, because that's what Xbox is going to do. All the Xbox generations are going to be backwards compatible because they have it on the original Xbox also. Original Xbox, 360, and Xbox One, we're going to have backwards compatibility for all of those platforms on the new Xbox console. So if Sony doesn't do that, it would kind of make them look bad, right? So and that's typically what people do, what companies do, especially console manufacturers. When they see their competitor has an edge over them, they typically do something about that. And typically what they do is copy that idea from their competitors, so their competitor no longer has an edge over them. And, maybe Sony's not too concerned about Microsoft, but I think they are. Because despite the PlayStation 4 completely outpacing the Xbox One, I'm pretty sure they learned their lesson from the PS3. They were so overconfident because the PS2 just dominated everybody. I don't think they're going to be stupid enough to have that same mentality, especially since there's a lot more at stake for Sony. The PlayStation is the most profitable thing Sony has. It's probably the only profitable brand that Sony has going for it. So I'm sure it would try to do everything it can to make sure that this console takes off. So maybe, I think maybe there will be PS3 backwards compatibility for this thing. PS3 was a very high regarded console. It ended up selling just as many units. Literally just as many units. It was a dead tie, the console war. For the 7th generation, it was a dead tie. Like, it was just, it was incredible considering all the hurdles the PS3 went through, but it was. So it was a very popular console. There's definitely a lot of games. There are some games that you cannot play on the PS4. I know there was a shit ton of remasters, but there's certain games you just can't play. And there were a lot of PS3 exclusives. So, and if it happens, maybe it would protect the PlayStation 3 from having its server shut down. That's another thing. But if they do add the backwards compatibility, if they do, and I'm probably being way too ahead of myself, but if they do, the one thing that they need, the one feature that they need for sure, is if they do that, they need to switch the controller layout, the button layout. So, you know how first-person shooters work? Or, you have to shoot with your shoulder buttons, and you have to throw grenades with your triggers. It was just, I mean, because the PS3 controller sucked. The triggers were awful on that controller. So they had to, compensate, because the shoulder buttons sucked for aiming and shooting. Like, it wasn't as good as the 360's triggers, but they had to compensate because those triggers were just so bad. Those PS3 triggers were awful. But the PS4 controller is fucking awesome, and I'm sure the PS5 controller will also be amazing. So we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, aiming with the triggers is something that they got to do. They got to fix first-person shooter layouts, or at least try. I mean, I know it would be hard because the layouts were already kind of set, but at least if you're gonna make an emulator, kind of like how you do in PC emulators, you can configure button layouts. So hopefully they have something of that nature, because I cannot aim with shoulder buttons in an FPS game. Like, if they have games like Resistance backwards compatible, or Mag, well, not Mag because Mag is offline, so not that, but other games that are first-person shooters like Killzone, the old Killzones, those types of shooters, I cannot use my shoulder buttons. I just can't. It was a bitch and a half already on the PS3. I did not like that. So if they do the backwards compatibility, I would hope that they would have some kind of remedy for that solution. But yeah, it would keep so many old games that people love and cherish that aren't getting remasters. It would keep them alive. It would keep the PS3 servers online. And it's very interesting that the PS3 servers are still up and running. That indicates that a lot of people still play online in the PS3, so Sony does see the market for that. I think they see it. So maybe there's enough in it for Sony to do that. I hope so, because the PS3 was an amazing console. So, yeah, I mean, there's only one way to find out, and it's to wait and see. We're definitely being ahead of ourselves because the PS5 wasn't even announced yet, never mind features. But it's fun to speculate. And if I had to do a percentage, I would probably say there's like a 55% chance that we will see a PS3 emulator. So more likely than not, but I'm not holding my hopes up because I do understand the complexity of that. And it might not be as feasible as I may think because, again, the hardware is just so all over the place that it might just be too difficult to emulate, or just Sony does not want to be bothered with it. I don't know.